Hello, I'm here in Brazil's biggest indigenous reserve, the Raposa Serra do Sol. The reserve is in Roraima, which is the most northern state in Brazil. Just to give you a sense of how big this reserve is, it's bigger than Hawaii and just smaller than the nation of Wales. So here's a map of South America. I'm right here on the Brazilian-Guyanese border, and here's another map with some of the best known tribes in Brazil. The community that I'm staying with is from the Macuxi tribe, and today I'm going to be painting one of the reserve's oldest members. Her name is Luisa. She's 96 years old, and unlike the younger generation of Macuxis who speak Portuguese, Luisa still speaks the Macuxi language and doesn't actually speak any Portuguese. Here I'm sketching in the proportions of the head. I start by marking the top and bottom of the head, and then drawing a centre line down the middle of the face. I then place the features and external contours in relation to these. I'm painting using oil paint on oil-primed linen canvas. I paint the face with just two values, one for the side of the face in shadow and the other for the side with more light on it. These tones can both be considered mid-tones, as I'm going to paint deeper shadows and lighter lights on top of them. I'm painting the big value shapes first, rather than working on a detailed underdrawing and filling in small areas. I find this mass approach much quicker. When I paint these light planes on the forehead, cheek and side of the nose, the head instantly has a sense of form and appears 3D. I find having this simple but solid planar structure to the head gives me a very solid foundation to paint on top of, with finer details and subtler colour adjustments. So you might be wondering, how come Luisa speaks Macuxi and not Portuguese, considering the Portuguese arrived in Brazil in the 1500s? Well, Brazil is an incredibly vast country, and the state now known as Roraima is quite far inland, surrounded by the Amazon rainforest. Nonetheless, the Portuguese discovered the Rio Branco River, which flows through Roraima, in the 1700s. 200 years after they arrived in Brazil. Portuguese attempts to colonize the region were largely unsuccessful, and there were various violent conflicts between the indigenous people and the Portuguese. The Portuguese did, however, establish Fort São Joaquim in a strategically positioned spot on the Rio Branco, and they did just enough to prevent the land being taken by the Spanish, who controlled Venezuela to the north, the Dutch, who controlled Suriname to the east, and the British, who controlled bordering Guyana. However, the British did manage to take some of the territory from Brazil. Yet right up until the 1980s, the region remained predominantly inhabited by indigenous peoples. In the 1930s, diamond hunting began, and gold and other minerals were found in the region. This led to an unsustainable growth in immigration. In 1950, the most populated city, Boa Vista, had just over 5,000 inhabitants. Today it has over 375,000 people. So as you can imagine, the region has changed greatly during Luisa's lifetime. However, 70% of the state is now protected indigenous territory, with tribes such as the Yanomami, Ingariko, Macuxi, Wapixana, and several other tribes still existing here. This particular indigenous reserve was only made a reserve by the Brazilian government in 2005 due to campaigns by indigenous peoples and activists. Here I'm trying to paint the folds and get the form of Luisa's top. If I had more time, I would paint over this with the patterns. However, I don't want to keep her too long, as she normally only sits out here for about an hour every afternoon, and then she goes indoors to rest in her hammock. As you can see here, I'm holding quite a few brushes in my hand. This is because I like to use different brushes for different areas. I try not to use a brush I painted a dark area with in a light area, or vice versa, as some of the paint will stay in the brush and mix with the other colour, creating a dull or muddy colour. I also have quite a variety of different brushes, flats, filberts and rounds. I find the small pointy rounds and filberts are especially useful in these final stages of the painting, as I can paint very fine and precise details with them. So I've been painting here for about an hour now, and I can tell Luisa is getting a bit tired, so I don't want to keep her too long. I feel happy that I've captured her likeness, and once I finished the painting I did show her it, and she smiled when she saw it, which was nice. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up to date with my new videos.